Good evening and welcome back. This is World Talks coming to you live from Warsaw. I'm Saria Strzemska. As Ukraine marks Constitution Day, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has used the occasion to unveil a new proposal to honor the country's national heroes. At the same time, Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha has announced a new agreement with Kuwait, signaling Kyiv's continued efforts to strengthen international partnerships. To discuss the significance of these developments, I'm joined by Stephen Moore, founder, Ukraine Freedom Project. Good evening, sir. Delighted to have you with us.
Sonia, always great to be with you.
So, President Zelenskyy has just submitted a draft law to Parliament proposing the creation of national pantheon, if you will, to honor distinguished Ukrainians. He also said, and here I quote, "No one will ever dictate which heroes we should honor." Now, the timing of this is interesting because it comes as tensions with Poland over the naming of military after the UPA, Ukrainian Insurgent Army, remain unresolved. So, do you see this as a deliberate political message or simply a coincidence?
Look, this is all nonsense. You know who benefits from this? Vladimir Putin. Ukraine and Poland need each other. Ukraine, is obviously keeping Putin from paying attention to Poland. And, the Poles provide an amazing amount of support for Ukraine. There's millions of Ukrainians inside Poland right now. And so for this sort of like historical divisive nonsense to be taking place right now, it only benefits Vladimir Putin. And what we see in my country, the United States, is that there's all kinds of divisive nonsense like this that is keeping us from functioning as a country. And a lot of it is Russian propaganda. And so I'm not saying this is Russian propaganda, but it is the same purpose as the propaganda that divides the United States.
But, how do you see this dispute ever being resolved? The one between Poland and Ukraine. What would it take to rebuild trust?
Oh, well, listen, the second that Poland is the recipient of Shahed drones, then this will be, old news. This is again, what happens is that, people find things to divide them until there's a greater force to unite them, and so this is something I think that will continue to be salt in the wound of Ukraine-Poland relationships until there's a larger force outside, Vladimir Putin, the Russians, that reminds everybody that they need to work together. So this may not be Russian propaganda, but this is something that the Russians benefit from, and I'm sure they're also pouring salt into that wound.
Now, the Ukraine Recovery Conference has just concluded in Gdańsk with nearly 200 agreements signed to support Ukraine's reconstruction. President Zelenskyy didn't attend, yet of course Poland remains one of Kyiv's strongest allies. So do these recent diplomatic tensions matter in the broader picture? Or are they likely to affect the long-term strategic partnership or not really?
Well, and what I think is that, as long as the actual assistance continues, as long as they're able to work together, what politicians say is a lot less important. The Polish president has his own domestic political concerns he needs to attend to. And obviously with this announcement, Zelenskyy is looking at domestic audiences in Ukraine that, feels like, they need to respond back to this. But, as long as the cooperation continues on a government-to-government level between Ukraine, Poland, and other allies, then that's the important thing. And so otherwise it's just a bunch of noise. And so I think the more, if you look at let's look at France. President Macron always says nice things about Ukraine, but France sends enough money to Russia for LNG on a daily basis to fund a couple of hundred Shahed drones every day. That is a problem. That is a real division, but it's not obvious because Macron always says nice things. But I think that the country-to-country cooperation between Poland and Ukraine continues despite what politicians might say.
So let's talk about some of these deals and needs. What are Ukraine's priorities in terms of reconstruction?
Well, I think the priorities in terms of reconstruction are winning the war, and so there's been reconstruction conferences since 2022, and we're at several $100 billion in reconstruction needs right now. The energy infrastructure is the obvious immediate necessity because winter will come. But again, I think that what needs to happen is that Russia needs to stop sending drones and missiles into Ukraine. When that happens, reconstruction will be a lot more obvious. And what I like right now is that Zelenskyy has this 40-day campaign to demonstrate to Putin that he needs to stop. And again, Putin won't stop until someone makes him stop. We'd like that to be NATO. We'd like that to be President Trump. We'd like that to be any number of people. But it seems like Zelenskyy, it seems like Ukraine is going to be the people that make sure that Putin stops this stuff. So, Ukraine is winning. Most of the world does not realize that. And so the more that Zelenskyy and Ukraine can attack inside Russia and bring the war back to the Russian people, that's going to bring it into this war. And then reconstruction takes on a whole new meaning.
So let's expand on this 40-day campaign that Zelenskyy announced. What do you think it will entail?
Listen, just more of the same. Who doesn't love seeing billowing black smoke in the skies of Moscow and St. Petersburg? Every time I see that, it brings a smile to my face. And so the more that can happen, and it's not just that happening, it needs to be communicated because in the United States, there's the Economist polls every week, and Americans still think that Ukraine is not winning. They think Russia's winning. Most Americans don't know who's winning. But if you look at the facts, there was 600 drones launched at Moscow in June, and they've been hitting with drones and missiles inside Russia in like 60 or 70 different spots in 2026. There you go. Isn't that a beautiful sight? Look at that oil platform exploding and that lid coming off. That is just iconic of what's happening with Ukraine inside Russia. So American audiences need to see this. European audiences need to see this. Everyone, instinctively, people like to bet on a winner. And certainly that's this way in America. And that's the way with President Trump. President Trump is famous for, saying so-and-so is a loser, so-and-so is a winner. And he needs to recognize that Putin is a loser. And I go back to May 9th with Putin's military parade inside in Moscow. Putin had to call President Trump on the phone and said, "Hey, could you ask Zelenskyy not to bomb my military parade? Because I need to show people how powerful I am, and I can't do that if Zelensky's bombing my military parade." So that is not a power move. That is not a message of a winner. Putin is losing. He knows he's losing, and we need to tell the world about it.
But what if it provokes some nervous reaction from Vladimir Putin? I think we can both agree that he can be quite unpredictable. Shall we be potentially worried?
Putin has been rattling the nuclear saber since at least September 2022. I remember being in Kyiv in 2022, and Putin starts talking about using nukes, and of course going back to France, Macron says if Putin uses nuclear weapons, France will not respond in kind. And I'm like, hey, Macron, use nukes or don't use nukes, but don't tell him Don't tell him ahead of time. Don't encourage him. But there's been several dozen times, you can count them up, where Putin has said that he's going to use nukes. If Sweden joins NATO, if Finland joins NATO, if Ukraine gets F-16s, if Ukraine gets tanks, he's going to use nukes. And none of them have come together. And he looks increasingly feeble and silly. And here's the thing, that just the calculus that comes down in Putin's mind is that he can afford to lose the West. He can't afford to lose China. China is his benefactor. He's essentially a vassal of Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping has told him many, many times, don't use nukes. He said it publicly. He brought Putin to Beijing and made him sign a piece of paper that said nuclear weapons should not be used in war, and they never will. And Putin depends on this saber rattling to scare the West, but Xi Jinping has made him disavow nuclear weapons.
Now, NATO summit in Ankara is starting on July 7th, and despite suffering enormous losses, as you've mentioned, Russia is still viewed as Europe's biggest military threat. At the same time, Ukraine now has one of the continent's most experienced armed forces. So has the way NATO and European capitals view Ukraine changed? Is Ukraine now becoming part of Europe's long-term security architecture?
Yeah, listen, as Poland becomes the recipient of Russian drones, and you guys have had at least 19 strikes inside Poland so far, who do you want defending you against that? Because there's four countries leading the world in drone warfare. It's Russia, China, Iran, and Ukraine. And nobody else has that kind of experience. And the United States is a distant fifth at best. You see in Iran that Shaheds come into American bases, and we use Patriot missiles to take them down. In fact, American doctrine says that you should fire 2 Patriot missiles at any incoming threat that's against a high-value target. And so Shaheds cost $35,000, and a Patriot missile costs about $4 million. So the math on that doesn't work, and the people who have the math down are the Ukrainians. So as drones become increasingly a factor in warfare, there's only one country that's friendly with the West that knows how to use them, and that's Ukraine.
Now, Kuwait has just ratified its agreement with Ukraine on cooperation in military and other spheres. And this, of course, comes shortly after Iran launched attacks on the country in a fresh wave of hostilities with the U.S. So it is another agreement in addition to what Ukraine already has with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. So how significant and potentially lucrative are these Middle East partnerships for Ukraine?
Oh, it's super important and very lucrative. I live in Kyiv. I recently got done with a tour of Ukrainian defense tech companies, and also we embedded with several military units using drones and drone defense, and they have tons of capacity. They say that they're about 60% capacity. So that's all they need is money to stoke up the military machine that produces these drones, attack drones, and produces the interceptor drones that take down Shaheds and other nefarious unmanned aerial systems coming from Iran or Russia or China or North Korea, for that matter. So, Ukraine is a partner. Ukraine needs the money, but Europe does not have a defense base. Just if you look even at artillery shells, it costs $3,300 to produce a artillery shell in the United States. It costs about $8,000 to produce an artillery shell in Europe. And it's because they just don't have the mechanism to do this. Europe has been skating on a peace dividend that is long overdue to end. And so Ukraine can be the arsenal of Europe. All it needs is the euros.
Stephen Moore, founder of Ukraine Freedom Project, thank you so very much for joining us this evening. Much appreciated.
Great to be with you.
And thank you for watching World Talks. Please stay tuned for more here on TVP World.